Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton here with Brandon. Big show on the way today. We're talking about Springfest, Brandon. It's finally here.
We are. And just before we get started, we have a couple things we want to quickly wrap up with in terms of news. Alicization 2 got a release date, that being October 1st. This is a little bit ahead of where we thought it could be, so we're looking forward to that coming out soon. This likely opens up potentially 3 dates left for releases towards the end of the year. Expect another one in end of October, which would be then Morphonica, then another in November, and then December.
Yeah, the Data Live reprint pushed back the Heaven's Feel 2 release, as we talked about before. What we didn't anticipate was that Bushiroad is going to then expedite the process for the rest of the sets for the year. So instead of releasing them every 4 weeks or so, the way they have been, they've sped that up about 3 weeks between releases for the last couple releases, and presumably for the rest of the year. I don't think that they'll try to squeeze 2 releases into December, just because I don't see them trying to release something over Christmas week. But the way things are going right now, like you said, something at the end of October, which is probably going to be Morphonica, Raise a Sullen, something yet to be announced for November, and something yet to be announced for December. The December announcement probably, if past patterns hold, going to be an English exclusive, which means that we have a November release that is completely up in the air at this point, based on the stream from March, the 13th anniversary stream. They announced a handful of titles in JP that could, in theory, work their way to English. There are a couple of those that stand out as more likely than others, though.
Looking at November specifically, potentially being Data Bullet, or even the extra booster for Popping Party and Rosalia for Bang Dream. Especially because those ones were really tied in close to the dates for Raise a Sullen. It's a very good possibility that those could be the ones that fill up that slot. Other things we're looking at potentially taking that slot as well could also be things like The Day I Became a God or even Symphogear.
Yeah, there are a couple of options here for Bushiroad. I agree with you that Data Bullet is the most likely outcome for that November release. I think eventually we'll see that Poppin' Party Rosalia release, just because we tend to get Bang Dream stuff. Still up in the air. Only one slot left, really, for the year.
I suspect they won't release 2 Bang Dream sets in a row.
Right.
Kind of like what they did with Madoka. They could cut something in between. I don't think they're going to put 2 Bang Dream releases in a row.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we could see the Bang Dream set January, probably. But again, still up in the air. Always a possibility that we could see something like Symphogear, The Day I Became a God, both of which are reasonably popular outside of Japan. Still some potential there, but until we get a November announcement, we're not going to get a clear idea of what's going to happen over the course of the winter. However, looking a little bit further ahead into the late winter and into the spring, there were a couple of titles announced on that stream that could show up then. Usually we see about a 6-month gap between JP releases and English releases. I anticipate that long term we're going to see the Fate Grand Order Camelot set in English. That was originally scheduled for fall 2021 in JP, and we don't have an updated release date for that yet. If that comes out in November, which is around when the next open slot would be, that would put that at about an April-ish release in English. So that's always a possibility. The other one that I think could get that kind of attention is Jobless Reincarnation, Mishoko Tensei. That one is being released end of July in JP, which puts that one in that January-February kind of space in English if that makes the move. So some stuff to watch for from that previous stream, but a couple of weeks ago, Bushiroad had another product stream where they announced a lot of new JP products that are coming later in 2021 that could make their way into English in the middle of the year in 2022. There are a couple of really big names in this, and I think the obvious headlines here are Danmachi and Hololive, both of which have been announced for JP with release dates. Danmachi in November and Hololive in September for trial decks. 7 trial decks being released in September, and then an extra booster on October 1st. I think these 2 sets make a lot of sense in English, but I think that Hololive in particular is interesting because we could definitely see a Hololive release with the JP Hololive characters. That's definitely possible. Those characters are certainly popular outside of Japan. But with English Hololive taking off last year and being as popular as it is, we could definitely see, and this is pure speculation, but we could definitely see a Hololive English exclusive next summer. Brandon, your thoughts?
I love the idea of an English Hololive. I think that would be a really fun thing to do. I think it'd be really interesting as an English exclusive for sure. However, looking at JP Hololive, I think that's also something that could make its way over. So seeing potentially maybe a sequel set as an English exclusive would be really interesting. But ultimately, I think that will depend on how sales do, and it looks like from the immediate reaction and perspective that sales will be pretty high for this JP release. Another set that came out in JP that is probably going to get region locked to Japan is the new Marvel set that's coming out as well.
That's not coming over here. There's no way that's coming over.
That screams licensing issue like crazy, so...
Oh yeah, it's probably like Star Wars in that regard. The JP license for Marvel probably wasn't that difficult to get for Bushiroad. The English license, probably impossible. There have been multiple attempts at Marvel card games in English already. I would be shocked if Marvel decided to give an English card game license to anybody outside of their own house. That would be really, really surprising to me. It's possible, but I would put that strongly in the realm of very, very unlikely. There were a handful of other properties that were announced in that stream a couple of weeks ago as well, some of which are very unlikely to make the jump, things like Marvel, Assault Lily Volume 2, because we didn't get Assault Lily Volume 1. There are a couple, though, that are really interesting, one of which is World Trigger, which will be released October 15th in JP, and one that I actually wished for on our wishlist show several months ago now, Zombieland Saga getting a trial deck and a booster on November 12th in Japan for the new Season 2. These are both toss-ups for me for English, but given that there are so few near sure things coming to English over the next 6 to 8 months that we know about, and that both of these will fit in like that spring window where we just don't have anything right now, we don't really have anything projected, we could see them. There's space for them on the release schedule as of right now. What do you think?
Yeah, there's definitely possibilities for sure. Be interested to see what that looks like.
I would just like to take this opportunity to ask Bushiroad English, please, please release Zombieland Saga. I will buy a lot of it, I promise, because that set would be super fun. So yeah, that's the latest on the release schedule that we know of, both for English and JP, as well as everything that we think might make its way into English that has been announced in JP. Still a lot up in the air, because beyond Morphonica, we have nothing announced officially for English. All spring, we had, Sword Art 2 we knew was coming, Alicization 2 we knew was coming, all this stuff that we knew would be released, but we just didn't have dates for. Now we're running out of announced sets. Now we're getting to the part where we don't even know what happens when we get to this part of the calendar. So, purely speculative. We'll see what happens. A lot of potential fun stuff on the horizon, though, for English Weiss, if JP Weiss is any indication. With that out of the way, it's time to get to the big thing, the main story. Springfest is back. It's this weekend, Friday, Saturday, if you are in the US, Saturday, if you are pretty much anywhere else. Registration is closed. We've talked about format and all of this stuff quite a bit before on a previous show. We'll link that in the description. We will link the Springfest page in the description so you can check out all the details as far as that's concerned. This show, we don't want to talk about format as much as we want to talk about what the tournament itself is going to look like. What will be there? What's going to do well? What do we need to prepare for to do well in this tournament? And I think where we need to start with that is looking at the set representation for the last important tournament we had, which was the ENTCG Mid-Spring Tournament, which took place a little over a month ago now. 62 players from all over the world, served as a pretty good tune-up for this tournament, and I think gave us some indication, at least, of what we could expect coming into this tournament. At that tournament, 16 of the 62 decks were Data Live decks, but Data Live, Fate, Konosuba, and Slime all missed the top cut. That was a wild tournament, and we talked about that in more detail, link in the description to that video. But is there anything that you see here, Brandon, from the mid-spring tournament that we can take in our Spring Fest preparation?
I think representation is actually going to be still a pretty big thing. I think it's going to have some similar representation numbers. I think Dal's going to be slightly underrepresented from what that was in the tournament. Still going to be a rather big portion of the representation itself. I would say probably somewhere around 20%.
That sounds about right. I would agree with that. There's been some hesitancy on Dal in recent weeks after it failed to make top 8. And we both agreed at the time, and I think we both still agree that that's not a thing to really worry about. If you're a Data Life player, the pieces are still good. It's still a really good deck. And it's still, realistically, the class of this meta. Just because it had one poor tournament doesn't mean that it's going to completely crash and burn across the board. If it crashes and burns this weekend, then we can probably start having the conversation about whether or not Data Live is actually as good as we thought it was. But for now, I think we still treat Data Live as the top deck in the meta. As far as representation goes, I expect similar numbers across the board. We'll probably see less of Madoka, because it's not as new. We're going to see Bofuri take a couple of those slots, just because it's the new set. Because Attack on Titan won, I anticipate that some Attack on Titan players will bring their old decks out of the woodwork, because they feel like there might still be some life in that. I also anticipate maybe a little bit more Adventure Time than we've seen before, just because it seems to continually do well. But other than that, we're going to see a lot of Bang Dream, a lot of Sword Art, a lot of Konosuba, just because it's what people have, and people tend to play what they have. That being said, Brandon, with all of that understood, let's have a look at the 10 decks that we think are the most significant going into Spring Fest. And by significant, we don't necessarily mean the best decks. These are not the 10 top decks necessarily in order, but they are either the kind of deck that can win or top this tournament, or the kind of deck that you're just going to see a lot of and you need to be ready for, because you're probably going to see it if you play 6 rounds, 7 rounds of Swiss in 2 different tournaments over the weekend. You're probably going to see most, if not all, of these decks. So without further ado, let's get started. Our Spring Fest deck-by-deck preview begins now, and we start with the boogeyman himself, Attack on Titan, Eren Mikasa, Wind Two Soul. It's still a thing. I literally just said I anticipate more of this. If you've played Weiss for any amount of time, you already know how oppressive Attack on Titan can be, but it has some unique challenges in this meta, Brandon. Clearly, it's still viable to a certain extent, but there's a lot of stuff that will deny that Eren combo, blinks, other removal tools, and it's harder than ever to get an on-reverse combo to go off, and the Mikasa really does need to get those reverses in order to get the extra burns. What can Attack on Titan do to top again in Springfest 2021?
Part of it is just sticking to its roots. You play that Eren combo, you use your move gears to get the tools that you need to move things around the board, to save as much board as you can in order to maintain advantage, to push you into level 3 so that way you can close out a game. AOT still has a very good top end that can still close out games pretty effectively. As long as AOT can keep tempo with your opponent, being able to close out a game as effectively as AOT can should allow it to be able to move forward into those top spots.
Playing into Attack on Titan, if you have the capacity to blink or level down or otherwise get those errands off the board and out of the combo loop, do it. That is one of the main ways that AOT generates its advantage, is by looping that Eren combo at level 1. And then its level 3 combo, the Mikasa needs reverses to get its extra burn. So that means you can leave an empty field if you're small, let them try to swing big as opposed to getting those burns off on you. Or if you can get big, get your backups down, don't let Mikasa get those extra burns in. But in any case, the move gear's still incredible. A lot to like if you're playing Attack on Titan. It's really reverse dependent though. So if you can deny AOT its reverses, you have a pretty good chance. Moving on, Adventure Time. One of the newest sets, the most recent English exclusive. It's got one of the most powerful top ends in the game, but that level 1 game is still up in the air even several months after its release, Brandon.
It's more or less play the spin in the roulette game of who's going to be bringing what level 1 combo. Whatever that level 1 combo is, this end game can close out a game. And with that in mind, Adventure Time just needs to be able to put itself in a position to be able to close out the game. Kind of similarly to AOT, if Adventure Time can stay in the game early, it has the potential to close out the game quickly. That's even into very compressed decks.
The level 3 choice combo for Adventure Time is one of the best closing combos in all of Weiss. It's really hard to deny those burns. It burns multiple times. Honestly, your best bet against Adventure Time is try not to get into level 3. Try to hold off on damage. Heal early if you can. If you have access to early play, heal. Get those down. Try to buy yourself as much time as you can. And you can also usually get some advantage on them in the mid game because, as Brandon mentioned, the level 1 game, not particularly sorted out. None of its level 1 combo options feel that great. Should be a few of these running around. It scored a top 4 in the mid-spring tournament. Any endgame that can close from 3-0 consistently is going to be something to watch. Adventure Time definitely has a chance to make some noise in this tournament. Moving on, let's talk about Bang Dream. Brandon, Bang Dream is all things to all men. You never quite know what you're going to play into when you see someone shuffling up Bang Dream. We do not have the time to talk about every potential Bang Dream iteration. What are some of the key things to note going into playing this set?
Some notable cards that are worth mentioning. One being That Irritating Girl, which is a 1/0 that has a potential +2 off of it. Costless, non-interactive. So that is a pretty powerful card to be able to help continue to maintain advantage early, as well as the level 3 Time of Our Life Kasumi that allows you to be able to combo with Standby to burn and then on reverse burn again, especially since it gives itself 4K power. These are definitely some potential cards to watch out for, especially if decks are running with blue and red.
Yeah, I think the most consistent card of Bang Dream is probably going to be that level 1 event. Really great plussing off of that, and it's pretty easy to get down if you run any blue. You talked about the standby combo at the top end. This can run standby triggers. It can run gate triggers. Lots of different things that you can see with Bang Dream. We will link in the description the Pittsburgh Weiss Schwarz Rush Rundown video on Bang Dream, where they talk a lot about some of the more individual builds that Bang Dream has to offer. And we will also link to Weiss Tea Time in the description. Taya is one of Weiss's best content creators, and she talks quite a bit about Bang Dream, so we will link to her website in the description as well, because we need to move on to talk about the new boogeyman, Data Live. Massive representation at the mid-spring tournament, did not perform well. It still has some of the most incredibly powerful pieces that we've ever seen in English Weiss. One of the best level 3 combos, an incredible level 1 yellow event, a couple of different ways you can play the level 1 game. There's 8 standby, there's choice standby. Brandon, what do?
The most represented one you're going to see is the 8 standby build by far. It builds up walls and challenges opponents to try to take on those walls with resources to try to back those up pretty high. Playing the deck, it's a very defensive deck. You're very much trying to dominate board and then on top of that, manage the top card of your deck in order to draw out the cancels to more or less stall out their resources to win the game.
Yeah, Data Live is a hard one to play into just because it does such a good job winning board. Honestly, one of the best ways to play into it, get over in any way that you can, if you can, because every time one of those 1/1s gets reversed, Data Live will usually have to pitch a card out of hand to save it. Best way to deal with Data Live is force it to use its hand resources because it doesn't build hand. If you can keep the Data Live player's hand empty and force them to rely on getting stuff down via standby and not having options to play out of hand, you can develop some advantage for yourself. Actually, Data Live doesn't have a lot of bad matchups against other good decks. Where Data Live can stumble is if it's playing into something that's memey, that can get obnoxious reverses, that can swing for high amounts of damage. In high risk, high reward kind of matchups, Data Live can struggle. So it'll be interesting to see if Data Live can consistently survive Swiss if it has to deal with those kinds of decks. Because once it gets into top 8, it's going to be a favorite. But it has to get to top 8 by beating all of the little goblins that want to nip at its heels. So it'll be interesting to see how it deals with those kinds of matchups. If it can set those aside, as I anticipate it can, we'll be seeing probably multiple Data Lives in top 8. Moving on, let's talk about Fate. Fate basically is one deck. It's the 8-bar deck, the Sakura combo at level 1, and the Neg Soul Rider combo at level 3. Times are weird for Fate right now. Heaven's Field 2 is coming out later this year. A lot of people still on this 8-bar list. It has some pretty significant weaknesses in the modern meta. There are a lot of ways to deal with soul walls. There are a lot of ways to deny reverses at level 1. Its bombs don't take care of standby targets because they're cost bombs, not level bombs. Is Fate still viable despite some of its bad matchups?
For sure. Fate still has a lot of consistency, which is going to be its kind of step over some of the many different things there. It also can heal pretty well, especially once it gets to level 3. All of those riders, even if they're not being used as soul walls, are still healers. Also, with Fate being able to manage its deck state, it can focus in and lean in more towards the compression version of the deck and force opponents to really have to try to play into the worst deck state possible, because Fate can control that very effectively.
A lot of refresh options in Fate. It's really hard to stay compressed. Multiple ways for them to force a refresh and to get a new deck. It'll be interesting to see if that's enough, because its top end isn't necessarily explosive. It's pretty much exclusively defensive. So we'll see if it can hold up. More and more Blink and Level Down showing up in the meta. An on-reverse combo at level 1. It never feels great. So we'll see if Fate can hold up. But as you said, it's really consistent. Has a tendency to loop its combo because it's running so many bar triggers. A lot to like here if it can find ways to deal with some of its worst matchups, like Data Live and Konosuba. Speaking of Konosuba, multiple ways this can be built. There's old Konosuba, which has the Yun level 1 combo and the Megumin top end that clock kicks and burns for 4. There's the new red Konosuba deck that has the level 1 Megumin Oboro combo that comes back into hand. Try to loop that off a salvage trigger, as well as the clock kick burn 3 twice top end that is also on a salvage trigger. And then you have over here kind of the other Konosuba stuff going on. There's a darkness package that's really interesting that can bring out a choice combo darkness for 1 stock at level 2. There's the aqua combo. There's the aqua combo that burns on gate. Sometimes you'll see like a modular top end where people are mixing salvage and gate triggers to try to, do something a little bit different. Maybe run gate triggers to try to loop the level 1 combo. A lot of interesting stuff here, but Konosuba has not been able to really put it together in recent events. On-reverse Yun combo struggles because it's an on-reverse combo in 2021. The Megumin Oboro combo is really subject to blink and level down. It's harder than ever to get that combo to loop, and its top end is very expensive. The darkness and aqua stuff is interesting, but it hasn't really been developed into the kind of endgame that can really close. What's the deal with Konosuba, Brandon?
Konosuba really needs to stick close to the things that it's good at. It's really good at the explosive endgame and messing with its components' compression. Whether it's the stock swap or the Fumio, being able to take control of your opponent's deck in order to squeeze out the amount of damage you need to win to close the game. That has been Konosuba's strength from the beginning, and relying into that, I think, is going to be how it is able to move forward from there. How you play into that, you basically didn't try to deny that as much as possible. You tried to essentially take control of your own deck state. You try to mitigate some of the different effects they can do, whether it's building up your own walls to deny reverses from Yun, or denying the Oboro combo in some way, whether through blink or other means, to negate its advantage early before it can build up enough steam to close out the game.
Konosuba does crutch really hard on those level 1 combos, and both of those level 1 combos, in red anyway, can realistically be denied. So finding ways to keep Konosuba's level 1 combo from going off as much as possible, or at the very least, keeping it limited so that it can't develop the hand size or, crucially, the stock to pay for its kind of expensive endgame, is going to be key to beating Konosuba long term. Moving on, let's talk about Love Live Sunshine. Sunshine will remain relevant as long as it can keep burning for big damage at level 2. The Chika-Yo combo, quote unquote, is still one of the most explosive damage engines in English Weiss. The level 1 game is not as strong. Brandon, Love Live Sunshine, is it still viable coming into 2021 Springfest?
Oh, for sure. Being able to maximize that damage output at level 2 and kind of just being able to essentially loop that multiple turns can be very oppressive very quickly. And unrealistically can close out games from as early as level 2. Especially in that matchup, you're going to need to be able to manage your compression pretty well to be able to negate just the amount of burns it's going to be dealing. As well as if you can have some way to be able to contest the Yo, try to minimize the amount of burns as much as possible.
It's a point we've revisited many times on this channel. If you have an explosive endgame that can close from 3-0, you have a chance to win any game. Love Live Sunshine, quintessential damage rush, really can close out just about any game against any deck if it can get its stuff together. Next up, ReZero, specifically ReZero Frozen Bonds, the Amelia endgame. Very powerful closing mechanics, can clock kick what's across from it, burns into empty lanes. A really consistent endgame that can close. The level 1 game, plussing level 1s, gets some stuff together. There are a couple of different ways you can play the level 1, but it's usually the book into the bar at level 3. Brandon, do the new updates to ReZero in Frozen Bonds give it enough tools to be a top-tier meta deck?
Oh, for sure. You have the versatility of the old set being able to play in with the new stuff from Frozen Bonds. So you have a lot of tools at your disposal here, and it plays well with some of the previous tools, especially Amelia-based tools that already existed. So you're able to put quite a bit into this ReZero build already. Just a variety of different techs to be able to mess with your opponent in different ways. The new stuff allows it to build up pretty significant walls that are harder to step over. It does run a lot of stock. It also has ways to try to refresh some of that stock options back together. It is a very solid set that can also be very consistent as well as compressed through memory and stock.
I like how versatile Frozen Bonds is. There's a lot that it does well. It didn't get as much attention in the early part of this year as some of the other more recent releases, but I think you and I both agree that this is legitimately a powerful set and one that is going to make a push to be top tier in the meta. Another one of those decks that grabbed a top 4 in the mid-spring tournament. Moving on, in the home stretch now, this is a set that had 2 top 8s in the mid-spring tournament. Sword Art Online. It's been around for a while, but Sword Art keeps kicking. There are a lot of different ways to build it. There's the old Sword Art stuff. There's the Alicization set that doesn't really interact with the old Sword Art cards. 2 very different sets, and then within each of those sets, different ways to build those decks. Out of all of the Sword Art stuff, Brandon, what do you see as the most viable builds coming into this tournament, and how can players prepare for it?
Sure. Looking at SAO, really should look at the classic SAO and then the Alicization. While technically being able to play them together, it's more effective to play them separately. So looking at the old stuff specifically, you're looking at kind of the bar book combos with the Yuki that allows you to be able to plus consistently and effectively and quickly, as well as the with the top end of the book being the Sinon last shot burns. So you're able to get significant burn 4s to get access to resources quickly and easily early on. And with on-consistent trigger for level 1 combo, it has the ability to loop as well. You're moving forward through that pretty well, and you don't even need to tri-lane to benefit highly from Yuki at level 1. So a very consistent deck there with some pretty explosive endgame burns. Looking at Alicization, a couple different routes that this could go, looking mainly at the Trial Deck Book combo and the Kirito Pants top end, has a little bit more of that consistency going forward with that combo. That's a deck that we saw with Vriez in WSI. That still seems to be kind of the consensus of the consistent build. Been a lot more experimentation with 8 wind decks from Alicization, trying to especially kind of counter some of the standby heavy or wall heavy decks that they may be playing into. So a couple different routes that SAO could go, but same ideas very much there, trying to build up as many resources as possible for a relatively explosive burn engine.
One of the most represented decks at the Mid-Spring Tournament tends to show up a lot in pretty much any tournament. It's a popular set. If you play in multiple tournaments this weekend, you're almost definitely going to see it at some point. One more set to go in this list. Let's talk about Slime. The Shizu level 1 cigarettes combo that goes to memory. The Shizu early play that heals and has hand encore. It does play the salvage combo at the top, although that's really more for the trigger than it is for the combo. This is a deck that likes to wall up, heal up, and stay out of level 3 for as long as possible. Brandon, you've spent a lot of time with Slime. Slime 2 comes out later this year, but for now, this is what we have going into Springfest. How can Slime do well in this kind of environment?
One thing that helps Slime do pretty well is to get that Shizu combo into memory, trying to focus in on that memory compression, and so that, and basically kind of slow down the game starting at level 2. Slime essentially wants to heal every turn. Once we hitting level 2 forward, it wants to continue that healing process. It wants to continue to compress through memory as much as possible. It wants to be able to prevent damage through that compression. Maintain the wall, compress, and basically stall out the game to win. Basically dealing vanilla swings to win. Playing into Slime, trying to be able to deny the level 1 combo to prevent the consistency of the early play Shizu is definitely one way to be able to disrupt the deck from maintaining this game plan, as well as forcing Slime to burn through resources faster, so that way it doesn't have the fortitude to continue that stall out game plan.
Slime's memory compression has probably made it the best set at stalling out at level 2 and keeping the game going as long as possible. It doesn't have an explosive top end, and that can come back to bite it in certain matchups. Its level 1 memory compression is susceptible to things like level down, as are those early play Shizus, forcing the Slime player to pitch out of hand to keep them on field. There are some things in the meta that make life difficult for Slime, but if it can get that memory compression together, it will continually get cancels, and you can't lose if they can't hit you.
I mean, you're not wrong.
And you can't lose if you're not taking damage. So, Slime, a very unique kind of build in this meta, one that we don't see a lot of with other sets, but one that is viable nonetheless because it has some of the best compression tools in all of English. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. It missed top cut at the Mid-Spring Tournament, despite having 3 decks in the tournament. So that is all for those sets. Again, those are not necessarily the top 10 sets, per se, but they are the sets that are the most significant going into this tournament, either because they have a really good chance of doing well, or simply because there's going to be a lot of them, and players need to prepare. So this is a quote-unquote tier list. It's not really a tier list. It kind of is. Things are separated into tiers, but they're not the tiers that you might be used to. Basically, this is a Springfest-specific list based on how well we think these sets might do this weekend. This has nothing to do with representation. The sets that we talked about before, those are the ones that are, not only good, but they will also be well represented. This has nothing to do with representation. This is based purely on what we think the sets are capable of. Obviously, Data Live comes in as the heavy favorite. It's going to be the most represented deck. It's considered by most to be the best deck in the meta. Clear front runner, expected to do well at this tournament. There are some challengers, though, and we're looking at, that second tier down. Attack on Titan just won the Mid-Spring tournament, obviously. Adventure Time can close games. Fate's been around for a while at the top of the meta. You will notice the asterisk on Goblin Slayer. That is Vince's Goblin Slayer. Without Vince, Goblin Slayer is down in probably the 4th tier, but when piloted by Vince, his list can definitely top 8. He came in 2nd at the Mid-Spring with it. The only Goblin Slayer that you probably should be very worried about is Vince. So if you're playing, just be aware there's a really good Goblin Slayer deck running around out there, because Vince is an incredible player. But as we mentioned, ReZero, Slime also kind of rounding out that 2nd tier.
Other decks we wouldn't be surprised by if we see those manage to make their way into top 8. Decks specifically like Bang Dream or Konosuba, SAO, or Love Live Sunshine. Those ones specifically, we could see those kind of sneak their way in, but they're not necessarily favorited to be in the top 8. And would not be surprised to see them, say, top 16. Would probably not be able to kind of close the distance between 16 and top 8.
Yeah, and I think that probably the one that's going to raise the most eyebrows is probably Konosuba, because that's been considered a top tier deck for a pretty significant amount of time at this point, both before and since the Legend of Crimson release. We, in our matchups video, where we talked about the matchups between what we consider to be then the top 5 decks in the meta, link in the description to that video. It's more or less for Springfest, so go ahead and check that out if you want to see more detailed, in-depth discussions of matchups between some of the best decks. As it stands right now, though, Konosuba has really struggled to do much in competition, honestly, and I think in large part it's because of how expensive its top end is. It doesn't generate enough stock to consistently get that top end together. There's some fundamental weakness in just about every facet of Konosuba's game. The level 1 combo either can be blinked or removed, or it needs a reverse. The level 3 combo is so expensive to pull off, and the other stuff, the Darkness and Aqua stuff, I just don't think is enough to push it into that top 8 tier. There's a lot of good stuff in Konosuba. It has a really good level 0 game, but it's really hard to get all of Konosuba's pieces together and functioning throughout the course of an entire game. And I think that Konosuba's tendency to get off the rails is gonna kind of be its undoing when it faces off against stuff that's more consistent, like Adventure Time and Data Live.
And to kind of close out the list, other decks we expect to see with representation, but not quite making that top 8 cut, are decks such as Bofuri, Magia Record, Fate Grand Order.
Yeah, this bottom tier is mostly stuff that has been released in the past year that people still want to play and are still maybe experimenting with. It has a chance to do something, if there's a build that, we haven't really seen much of, or someone does something creative, maybe something that can counter some of the best decks in the meta, get some wins that way. But a lot of this is just new stuff, and at events we tend to see people playing the new stuff. So I expect to see a couple of Bofuri. Probably will see some Magia Record. There were 4 of Magia Record in the last event. I expect that number to go down a little bit. Memory Snow is a weird one. It's really only here because it has some really nice anti-standby tech, and because of the prevalence of standby in the meta, especially the 8 standby Data Live, if it runs into a handful of Data Live players, if it can consistently get its anti-standby tech together and continue to deny standby decks their advantage by keeping them from using multiple standby triggers in a turn, keeping their boards small enough so that they can get reverses, things like that, it's certainly possible for Memory Snow to cheese out some wins from top tier decks. It's also good enough on its own to get some wins. It definitely has bad matchups with most of the stuff that's at the top, but if it gets a couple of games against stuff that's lower tier, maybe not on this list, and then can play into the matchup that it was preparing for, which is, like that Data Live matchup, it could win enough games where it could threaten top 8. There are universes in which Memory Snow makes top 8 in this tournament. Will it happen? I don't think so, but it's at least worth mentioning. Gun Gale, kind of a similar thing. It has a very specific game plan that can play really nicely into certain matchups here, so it always has a chance. Grand Order is mostly new, but it also has some fun stuff at the top end that can get wins. The decks on the bottom tier here are not bad decks by any means. I mean, there are a lot of bad sets out there. None of them are on this list. These are the sets that have a chance if they get their matchups and they get a little bit lucky. As for the rest of the list, though, we talked almost exclusively about stuff that's sitting in the top 3 tiers here. Again, Goblin Slayer, that is strictly Vince. He is dangerous with his Goblin Slayer list specifically. Is there anything else on this list that you want to point out, Brandon?
Worth noting that these aren't in any particular order regarding, within the tiers themselves.
There have been a lot of tier lists running around recently, and those are useful. We wanted to focus on this event specifically, and also just kind of give general ideas. It's splitting hairs, kind of, if you want to make an argument over which deck is better than which one in the tier. The point is, in general, this is about where we expect the decks to sort themselves out over the course of the weekend. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because whenever you put out like a projection style tier list, you're kind of sticking your neck out there. So it'll be interesting to see if this actually plays out the way we think it will. In any case, this is what we think the Springfest meta looks like, but we've got 3 tournaments this weekend. Those tournaments are going to determine what the meta actually is. By the time the weekend is over, there will be a lot to talk about. All that being said, we will be participating in Springfest this weekend. Should be a fun weekend. Lots of really, really good players from all over the world playing a game that is really fun to play. So, best of luck to all of you participating. We will definitely have more to talk about in regards to how this event went in a couple of weeks. But before then, we have a bunch of other stuff coming up as well. More 5 Cards 5 Minutes. We're wrapping up Beaufry on Thursday. Brandon will have a deck tech on Tuesday. Gameplay for that deck tech a week from Thursday, before we come back to talk about how Springfest went down in 2 weeks on the next Clock Talk. Until next time, however, thank you so much for joining us, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.